Welcome back to another video, and today I'm going to be talking about how the GFL is honestly going to fail, if we're going to be honest, as a MMA organization. We've recently within MMA, we've seen organizations kind of come by and go, like Bellator within this example. And the GFL, I feel like it's just a short-term product. I'll explain more later in the video, but before we get into it, if you guys can, please hit the subscribe button. As a goal right now is to get to 10,000 subscribers. Anyways, let's get into it. So what is the GFL? The GFL stands for Global Fight League, where their big unique selling point is that they have teams. Instead of, PFL has a tournament, UFC, there's just rankings, individual rankings to try getting for the championship belt. GFL's big thing is that there's organizations, there's teams from different parts of the world, like Team Dubai. There's also Team Brazil, Team Los Angeles, right? Just different places in the USA. Even Team New York, I believe, is another one as well. You guys get the point. Now, in order for the GFL to be successful, they have to do that in two ways. A, have some sort of advantage over the UFC, and B, they have to have a long-term vision. And in my opinion, they do already kind of grasp that interest from a UFC audience already existed just because the GFL has gotten old UFC fighters to now fight on their organization. And that is, you know what, that's fair to get some sort of eyes onto your organization. But again, that's not smart long term because there's a reason why they left the UFC or the UFC cut them because they weren't too good to be in the UFC anymore. Maybe because of age and for other reasons as well. Maybe they got to a bad losing streak. There's a lot of anomalies that get into it, but you have to think about it like this: the UFC at the end of the day is like the NBA for basketball, the NFL for American football, right? And those big powerhouse organizations, it's kind of hard to get that secondary league to take over them because again, their roster. The NBA has the best roster in the world. All the best basketball players go to the NBA. And the UFC, it's the same thing. That's why the PFL is also kind of struggling a bit too. Yes, they had the tournament idea, but I think people are getting tired of that tournament idea because of the fight competition being lackluster compared to the UFC, where the best talents go to that organization. And that's what my issue is with GFL and why I think is going to fail because I don't think they have a long-term vision. You see, the GFL, in order they want to be a sustainable company, has to think outside of 2 to 3 years. Maybe people would be interested in the GFL for the first couple years because they want to see how this team organization style of the sport, how that's going to be implemented. It's a new idea. I think already existed MMA, UFC fans would be interested to see how that concept works. But after the concept has been there for 2 to 3 years, what else do they have left? Do they have top tier MMA talent? I mean, they have UFC legends, but again, how many fans from the UFC or MMA overall will go out of their way to watch UFC legends fight? Don't get me wrong, it's still quite a bit, but it's not a substantial amount. If that makes sense. Like the UFC, let's say for example, in a normal UFC pay-per-view, hypothetically, the UFC on average gets 500,000 buys. And out of those 500,000 buys, 100,000 of them are hardcore UFC fans. You take a slice of that, and that's who I feel like would be interested into the GFL. And long term wise, they cannot survive off of that. And they have to get some sort of advantage against the UFC. And for maybe the first couple years, because this is a new idea, some people will be interested, even on top of the fact that the legends are fighting within this organization. But after that runs out, what is next for the GFL? And that is where it will be an issue because I don't think they have the long term plans after 3 years. The idea hasn't even been implemented yet, and people are already having their speculations on whether it's a good idea or not. So that kind of says they cannot be complex about this as well. Just because if I am hypothetically a new fan of, let's say, MMA, and I'm trying to figure out all the organizations within MMA, and I tried looking at GFL for the first time, it's gonna be confusing to look at, and it might not appeal to those new fans. So yeah, I personally feel like overall, it's not a good idea. At least long term, I really don't see this company surviving. Hopefully, they prove me wrong. Um, I Other than that, I just think it's gonna take a lot for a new organization to take over and I guess overtake the UFC, even if they ever do, because the PFL, like if we're gonna be honest, the PFL also kind of fumbled their chance, in my personal opinion, as well. And that's for a different video. I can explain why I think the PFL kind of failed their aspect into any chance of taking over the UFC. They've kind of failed it. But anyways, if you guys like this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know what you guys think of the GFL entering into the MMA space. But anyways, I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.